Hi, everybody. Welcome to the John Myer podcast. Today, we're actually talking about AWS Savings Plans. And a week ago was a release for the 7-day return policy. Joining me now is a good friend of mine, Rick Ochs. Rick, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, John. It's nice to chat with you. Looking forward to what we get to talk about today.
Rick, now we've been longtime friends. When I was at AWS, you were at Turbonomic, we were at Turbonomic, IBM. Now you're at AWS, and we chat frequently on and off. And when you released this feature, I was like, dude, this is really cool. Being that I was at AWS when Savings Plans was released in 2019. Talk to us more about this feature and the thoughts behind implementing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spend a lot of time talking to customers about their practice and their methodology for purchasing savings plans. And what we hear is that it takes customers a long time to validate the purchase because it's a lot of money on the line, right? They don't want to make any mistakes. So there's a lot of analysis that goes into what kind of savings plans, 1 year, 3 year, tracking the ROI, the coverage. So there's so much science and math that goes into this decision-making process. It can be a little bit anxiety ridden. We don't want that. We want it to be enjoyable and easy and really self-service capable. So we wanted to offer a little bit of capability here that helped customers kind of have a better experience when they're working with commitments with AWS, and ideally de-risk the workflow when they need to make commitment purchases. That it's okay to make a mistake. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. Being able to say, oops, I picked the wrong instance family for an instance savings plan, or the wrong region, or any sort of term or setting on a savings plan. We really want people to be able to go back and say, okay, let me redo that. Right.
Rick, let me ask you the question. Could you always typically kind of return maybe a savings plan if you reached out to your contact and went back and say, oh my goodness, I got buyer's remorse. I didn't mean to actually purchase this.
So we love being customer obsessed at AWS. It's really fun. It's fun to see those tickets when they come through and people making those requests, because you get to see like the different AWS employees' obsession on display is how they interact and sort of support people. So yeah, we've got a great support team that helps people through those situations. That support team was one of the biggest champions as we were working on this project to say, hey, wow, this is like an experience we would love to improve and provide self-service. So there was definitely, our RI operations ticket team that would handle those sorts of requests, and they're just a fantastic team to work with. But how long does it take to get a ticket back, and how long are you waiting, kind of worried about it? We wanted to improve that, right?
So you wanted to improve the customer experience overall and make it an automated feature within the console for you to be able to, oh my God, I got a reverse action here. I didn't mean to purchase that. And we realized the next day. And how many times have you actually done it? I've done it a couple of times where I went in and I purchased something and I'm like, oh, no. I looked at the wrong data. I got to go back and actually change this and modify this and make sure that I get the right savings plans for the right account, the right environment.
Yeah, and I've heard other FinOps, fairly famous FinOps practitioners say, "Oh, just tell your TAM what it is you want to buy it. Make them buy it. So if there's any mistakes, the TAM can go with it." So I've heard that
Put the
feedback.
pressure on them.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought that was funny advice and not wrong, but you don't have to do that. You should be able to go through the process of evaluating savings plans and making the commitments and feel good about it.
Well, you talked about FinOps. How does this value the FinOps community or environment?
Yeah, so like a mature savings plan purchasing strategy that we've seen really become, I don't know, maybe like the definition of what the run state is for commitment management is to buy smaller savings plans and layer them together. So you buy some 3 year, you buy some 1 year, you have some RIs for other resource types, and you sort of mix and match because you get more flexibility with compute savings plans, but you get higher savings with instant savings plans. So we're working with a lot of customers that have had these really cool purchasing models where they have a lot of smaller commitments and they mix and match. And then you don't have the risk of, oh my gosh, I've got one giant 3 year savings plan that's going to expire next Tuesday. and gosh, I've got to be like super ready to repurchase or refresh that like the minute it expires because it's so large that any minute it's not running. We don't want that. So we see a lot of customers buy smaller ones. That way, at any given time, they might have one expiring soon, and then that uncovered set of resources are easier to right size, and so they still retain a lot more flexibility that way. And this is great because with the return, you can buy those smaller savings plans. They're eligible for return. You can kind of layer them together, and it's easier. It's easier to make those smaller, more incremental purchases and do that sort of super mature layering approach. Um, Before, if you're making a lot more purchases, you might have felt like, oh my gosh, if I'm making this many purchases, the risk of making a mistake might go up because we have to go faster or something like that. And that's what it's just like. We're seeing tons and tons of customers do this super cool, mature layering approach, which is awesome. Uh, Retaining flexibility and committing for higher discount amounts is nifty, right? Like that's mature cloud cost management.
I think this ad not only putting the power in the hands of the AWS users, the FinOps practitioners, the community really utilizing this tool and taking the pressure off of them of purchasing one day, the next day they come in and realize the mistake they made or the modification they got to do definitely has customer centric written all over it. When I saw you post about it, I was like, wow, the stress taking off of the purchase was perfect, and making it available for end users within the console was probably the most key thing, rather than contacting support and doing this manually, going back and forth and being like, please cancel that. Before we wrap it up, Rick, let me ask you this question. Or anything that you should take in consideration when you're purchasing savings plans that apply to the 7-day return policy?
Oh, sure, yeah, good question. So, the return button disables at the end of the month because we have to close the monthly bill. And so you might want to change your purchasing patterns to fall a little bit earlier in the month to avoid the end of month cutoff. You have 7 days. So when you purchase a commitment, a savings plan, you have 7 days to hit that return button, um, unless the month rolls over, right? Because we have to close the books. So definitely do those purchases a little earlier in the month. And then I would also say the smaller purchases are eligible. Well, smaller relative, they're pretty big, but there's $100 an hour. Anything under $100 an hour commitment amount is eligible for that return. And that equates to something like 800K for a 1 year or 2.5 million for a 3 year, something like that. So there's still, the numbers are really high. But if you are making really big savings plans purchases, you have that option to cut them up into smaller bits and pieces and then purchase them, and then they'll be eligible for returns.
When you say the return button disables at the end of the month, is it only one day at the end of the month, so the last day of the month, or is it a couple of days? Just to kind of put in perspective how much time somebody should plan. Like, they're at the 27th day and they have a 7-day return policy, but we're in 31 days of the month and 30 and 31 are disabled. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's it. When the month clicks over. So if you just like walk back from the last hour of the month, right? So you would probably want to purchase 7 days plus 1 hour of the last hour of the month. I
Uh,
mean, you don't have to get
All
that
right.
precise, right? Like you probably know
Yeah.
within a day or two. I mean, we provide a week-long window because we thought a week is probably a reasonable amount of time to make that validation and figure out, hey, was this the right thing to do? And if you want to build a new mechanism to validate your purchases within 3 or 4 days after you make them, I think that makes sense. That's reasonable.
Actually, that's a good way and another tool that could be developed or utilized to make sure that the purchase you did is doing what you wanted. And you're like, okay, it's not. I need to do some other ones. And you can also return some or add some or, do additional, kind of compute savings plans on top of that. And smaller ones are really kind of key in this aspect, right?
Absolutely, you nailed it. Tracking SP utilization, coverage, right? The typical KPIs people use to look at health of commitment management, and then also the
Yep.
recommendations, because you can just click the refresh button. That's one thing that's really powerful is you could buy one, click the refresh button, and say you wanted to buy a smaller amount. So you buy a smaller amount, then you refresh the recommendations. They're going to show you the delta of what's remaining left to recommend to buy. And so you can go purchase, refresh back and forth multiple times and then layer them together.
That's pretty cool. That's actually a good tip to purchase, refresh, and just kind of go back and forth and test things out. You don't have the stress of not being able to return it anymore. It's an awesome feature.
Thanks, John.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for joining me and discussing around the AWS 7-day return policy that was just announced and released a week ago. This video is actually going to come out in a couple of days, but I really appreciate you talking to the audience about it.
Absolutely. And I have to call out, like, this feature was a collaboration between the EC2 organization, my team, the support organization, the visualization reporting team, which is a sister team of mine that works on the utilization and coverage reports. So everybody pulled together to put this out and make all of the different tools and reports compatible with return capability. And it was really cool to see so many teams kind of drop everything and pivot and work on this, because it's fun to be customer obsessed and do things that we think customers are going to love. So this was definitely one of those team effort, cross team collaboration exercises that was really effective.
Rick, there has not been a video or podcast that we've done that you have not given the credit to everybody else. And I admire that about you. It's a huge thing for you to call out all the teams and everything that really goes into launching a new product or service.
Thanks, John.
All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up this short video on the John Myer podcast. Rick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, John.
We're out of here.